I've never had us have no zero attendees before.
We're also 2 minutes early and people are very particular about this. I don't know what to tell you.
All right.
People really like the
Punctuality.
punctuality, yes. Oh, in case anybody doesn't know, I'm her daughter. That's why I'm talking to her this way.
We kind of guessed.
Yeah. Oh, Mom, it's because we
You're more.
Are you snapping your fingers?
Okay, we're starting.
I didn't quite start, guys. Okay. There you
go. Hi, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining. We are quickly getting a number of attendees, so we're just going to wait a couple of minutes until we kind of see the numbers slow down, and then we'll get started with tonight's session. Thanks again for attending. Those numbers are still climbing. So again, for those of you who are just joining, thank you for attending. Welcome. We're just going to wait for the numbers to slow down a little bit, and then we'll get started with tonight's session. All right, we're starting to slow down here. We'll give it maybe another 10 seconds, 15 seconds, and then we will definitely get started. I know everyone appreciates the punctuality of these sessions, so we will make sure to stay on track. All right, thanks very much for attending, everyone. I'm Casey with Sanderson Management. Beside me is Caitlin Beacock. She's my tech moderator for this evening. I want to thank everyone for attending. I'm going to introduce our panel here as we go into our 5th condo education series that Sanderson Management has held. This one is communication, the human connection. And I think that's super important for everything that we deal with, because we definitely are dealing with humans, obviously, within condominiums, and communication is a key factor in everything that we do. I'd first like to start by introducing our panel. I'm super excited for tonight's guests. I really appreciate them taking time out of their very busy schedules to be here and to help us and to help make condos a better place to live and help us build community as we move forward. First, we have Martin Venema. He is a property manager with Sanderson Management. He manages a portfolio of properties that include townhomes, high rises, and common element corporations. He joined Sanderson in 2022 after a 38-year career in banking. He actually lives in a condominium himself, so he knows both sides of the world and is the president of the board of directors for the condominium he manages. And no, we do not manage that corporation, just for, total transparency there. So he definitely plays both roles. We have Luis Hernandez, and Luis is a condominium lawyer with LDDC, which I'm so glad I don't have to pronounce the full name anymore. That's so exciting. I love the initials. His practice focuses on assisting condominium corporations with all of their legal needs, including corporate governance work, compliance, and litigation. He works alongside property managers and directors every day to tackle tons of issues they experience in residential condominium communities. And he's a frequent educational speaker in the industry and a contributor to industry publications. So thanks so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. Next up, we have Juliette Hunter, and she is our customer success manager at Condo Control. She works directly with us at Sanderson Management. We're so lucky to have her. Additionally, she's also licensed as a condominium manager, holding her general license, and she has over 15 years of commercial and condominium experience. managing all types of different facilities and homes, as well as holding upper management positions in companies as the manager and director of all administrative departments. She was also a board member for 6 years and a board president for 3 of those 6 years. And understands the roles and pressures of board members, managers, and as well as service providers to the condominium community. So we are super excited to have her here with her breadth of knowledge. Thanks so much for attending, Juliette.
Thank you.
And certainly last but not least at all, we have Sue Langlois. Sue is a lively, passionate firecracker. Those are her own description. I 100% agree. I would have used those same words to describe Sue, of a condominium communications pioneer. Bright, bold, and quite often boisterous, she's known for affable nature, creative banter, and uncanny ability to assemble 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzles in less than a day. Oh, I'm so jealous. That's impressive. Impressive. A condo board's dream when it comes to running community nightmares. Trust her to solve your condo's communication puzzles with candor and wit. And I think that's a perfect description. I'm so happy to have you here, Sue. Thanks for joining.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Perfect. And so let's get moving on. I was corrected though, that this is actually our 7th Board of Education series, our Board Education series, not 5th. So I want to point that out there. We've actually done this a little longer than I give us credit for. So thanks to my team for helping put these all together as well. All right. So one thing I like to do when we run these sessions is I like to put out something of I like to tell you a little tidbit about all of our panelists. And then at the end, we combine the little tidbit to who the panelist was. So you have to write down your answers. And with it being Super Bowl weekend, we thought we'd stick with that theme. And we are moving out. We're coming up with some of their Super Bowl favorite snacks. That was a mouthful. I apologize. So someone on our panel does a football-shaped Rice Krispie treat. So it's a Rice Krispie treat in the shape of a football. I'm telling you, that's pretty impressive. Someone else on our panel is well known for their mini Mac sliders. Someone else on our panel is all about the potatoes. Taters, taters, taters. So someone here. And also someone has a huge passion for chicken wings, which of course is a Super Bowl staple. So again, write down who you think each of those snacks applies to, and we will talk about who are the famous cooks / bakers at the end of the session. All right, let's get to it. If you have any questions or comments, if you wanted to just put them into the chat, we will be the Q&A. I apologize. Into the Q&A. We'll be reviewing the Q&A throughout the presentation. We also had some of you put in questions in advance. We have those and we'll be answering those at the end and throughout the presentation as well. Any questions we don't get to, we will definitely provide answers to when we send out the whole recording and all of the notes, et cetera, that go with it. So that's how this all works. So hopefully that makes sense. Again, if you have any other questions, we will be monitoring the Q&A throughout the session. All right, let's switch that slide. We have a little delay here with our internet, so we'll try and keep it moving on. So first off, to start our session, we're going to have Martin speak and with Luis and talk about the roles of managers and board members and things that each of us is responsible for and should know and take away from each of our roles. So Martin, do you want to start us off?
Sure do. Thanks, Casey. Communication is a huge part of what I do as a condominium manager. And we've listed some of the things here that I would be communicating with board members about. When we're planning a board meeting or planning a meeting of owners, I will talk to the board around what should the agenda items be. I'll put together the packages, whether it be for a board meeting or a meeting of owners, and then help answer any questions both before and during the meeting. Every month, I see your financial statements. I review them before I send them out and then review them again with you during the board meetings. Same thing for budgets. I'll prepare a draft budget, review it during the meeting, and also get quotes for any work that needs to be done around the condominium corporation. Of course, if there's an emergency, it's all hands on deck. We drop what we're doing. I call in my colleagues to help when I need to, or contractors, because an emergency is not something that can wait. And it's worth mentioning here that with Sanderson Management, we have 24/7 availability to deal with condominium emergencies. And I think, as Casey mentioned how critical communication is, but it's critical for us to communicate often and to keep those lines of communication open with board members, with contractors, and with owners as well. Should we go to the next slide? There we are. Role of the board members. And so when I work with boards, I really look to the board to make the decisions for the corporation. I see my role as proposing solutions and making recommendations, but not necessarily making a decision for the condominium corporation. My job is to implement once the board has decided what to do. I love it when board members ask questions. Because of my background, I particularly like questions about financial statements, because I take pride in having reviewed them in a lot of detail. And then during a meeting, I'll ask you to approve the minutes, approve the financial statements, review and approve, if appropriate, the contractor quotes and the contracts, and then work with me as your manager around implementing any changes, discussing how we're going to communicate those changes to owners, and just keeping up to date with what's happening around the condominium corporation. And again, it's keep those lines of communication open, and we decide, depending on what we're talking about, we'll decide what's the best type of communication. Can we go to the next slide for that one? So how do we communicate? So if I need to issue a formal communication, particularly one that requires follow-up, I'll send a letter. So think of things like a violation letter. Nobody likes sending or receiving violation letters, but you want to make sure that you've got a good paper trail, and it is very much formalized. But if we're just going to make an announcement to say, the water is going to be off or the fire alarm test is going to occur, then we just need a bulletin. And I love putting bulletins on condo control. Sometimes in high rises, we also like to put them in the elevators just for our residents. The vast majority of my communication is via email. And all of us get lots of emails and send lots of emails. And even when we're sending a letter, it's often attached to an email. Verbal communication, I'll pick up the phone if it's a problem that needs to be resolved. Sometimes things can get lost in translation on email, especially if the situation is getting pretty tense. So when it comes to conflict resolution, dealing with problems, I prefer verbal communication, and frankly, even in board meetings, of course, those are all verbal. You don't really want to do those in writing. All right.
All right. If it's all right, I'll jump in there and just kind of add on a little bit to what Martin said. I think a big part that's important to think about when it comes to the role of the board versus the role of the manager, and congratulations, the lawyer is speaking, so it's going to get a little technical here, but we like to make sure that there's an understanding that the board is the decision maker. You are the leader of this not-for-profit corporate entity that you're running, and your manager, they're agents. Usually, I've seen Sanderson's management contract, so I know usually it's an agency relationship, but that's how it usually is with most condominiums. And that's important because oftentimes owners end up conflating who's actually in charge. And at the end of the day, your management, they're advisors. They are agents that are helping out the corporation and providing their expertise and best advice possible to help the condo run properly. But at the end of the day, they can only lead the horse to water. They can't make it drink. It's the board who makes these decisions. But as volunteers, you as the board really should be listening to your managers and your other contractors and professionals, because they do this every day. They're not volunteers, and they really have your best interests at heart. But now I can tiptoe into the communication aspect of it. And Martin already touched on this a little bit, and I've got Winnie the Pooh here as a nice little example in terms of formal versus informal notices. So in my line of work, I always have to think about, what does the law say? What do your governing documents say? And that's what I use as my guideline to determine what is a formal notice versus what's an informal notice. So a formal notice, Martin kind of alluded to it, he sends it out by letters, and it's the type of thing that is required either by the Condominium Act 1998 or by your declaration or your bylaws or your rules. And the formality is set out by these governing documents that will tell you how long in advance they need to be sent out, what they need to contain. So you want to make sure that you know, when you're providing information, first and foremost, is it a formal notice or is it an informal notice? An informal notice is something that, generally speaking, is not legally required to be given, but as a matter of good governance, we're talking here tonight about the human connection. In my mind, even though I should technically say that the formal notices are more important, the informal notices are the ones that really build that human aspect. They're the ones that build that community in your condominiums. So in my mind, they're the most important ones, because perhaps legally I don't need to give you updates on a project every month or every 2 weeks, but that's what gives people comfort in their home and their investments. It's what helps them feel that they're part of this community outside of this mandated legal form that comes on a 3 or 4 page government required document that is harder to navigate, right? The informal notices are going to be the ones that we're going to talk about the most here tonight. And I think they're the ones that ultimately end up really building your communities. So if I could go to the next slide, and this one's pretty simple because I don't want to get into too much technical, but when you do have formal notices, you need to know how they're supposed to be given. So Section 47 of the Condominium Act tells you how formal notices are supposed to be given, but your bylaws also further provide clarity on that. So your bylaws will say, if you put something in the mail, it's not considered to be received until 3 days after or 5 business days after. So these are things that you want to be mindful of. And I'm speaking here more to the managers. The managers are the ones that will know where to find that stuff. They deal with these types of bylaws every day. They know where to find that information. And I know for a fact that they know what Section 47 of the Act says in terms of sending out notices by mail and sending them out 15 days in advance if it's a notice of meeting, or 20 days before that if it's a preliminary notice of meeting. So I don't know if you actually saw the sign, but I put, thank you for noticing this notice. It's pretty important. We want notices to be attention grabbing. So you've got your formal notices. Those are the ones that go under the Act. You don't have a lot of discretion there, but your informal notices, you'll have a lot of ways to draw people's attention. And I know for a fact that Sue is going to touch on that. So I'm not going to belabor the point there. If I can get the next slide. So one thing that is really important when you're thinking about condos is the fact that information, record keeping, all of that, like transparency, is at the core of the condominium. Some will call it concept, they'll call it an experiment. It hasn't even been around for over 100 years, but it's amazing how you see these thousands of little communities governing themselves. But in Ontario, we have a pretty robust regime where people ought to be given as much information as possible. So what you see here are 4 bullet points, and separately, they may not mean much to you in terms of chronological order, but I have organized them in a way that will kind of walk you through the stages of ownership in a condo. So your status certificates, which disclose a lot of information, all of your governing documents, what's going on with your finances, your legal situations, your et cetera, your upcoming projects. That's what I would call your pre-purchase documents. And that lets prospective purchasers know what they're buying into and what they're getting. And then once you actually purchase the unit, you get a new owner information certificate. And that's something that's required to be given to new owners. And it welcomes them into the condo so that they understand the lay of the land. You would think that they would know that from the status certificates, but the idea here is to really keep owners informed. And these last 3 certificates that I'm mentioning here didn't come into effect until about 7 years ago in 2017. So they're a relatively new concept as well. I guess not that new, but anyways. Then you've got periodic information certificates, which are, I'm sure you've seen them. They're the primers for your condominiums. You get them twice a year, and it gives you a condensed version of what's in the status certificates. This needs to be sent out twice a year, and it keeps people informed throughout their ownership of the unit. And last but not least, you've got the information certificate updates, which under the Condo Act, these are regulated so that if there are any changes that the Condo Act, the legislature feels that is important enough that owners really should know, then these information certificate updates have what are called triggering events. And you will get an ICU, as we like to call them, in the mail or whatever notice if you elect to receive them electronically to actually update you on that change. So for example, if your board members change, if your management changes, if your insurance deductibles change. And again, the entire purpose is for owners to be aware of what's going on in their community, their corporation, their investment. And if I can get the last slide, and this one's pretty straightforward as well. This one is literally an open book. What you see on the page in front of you is an open book, and it is a principle that has been true in condominiums forever, but it's also been codified into the law. There's tons and tons of cases that talk about this. Your condos, they're not-for-profit entities. It's a weird legal ownership structure with all of your neighbors. And the idea is that all of your condominiums records ought to be an open book. So Section 55 of the Condo Act enables that and grants owners the ability to request records with certain exceptions, of course. And again, this is all part of building the community. And the only reason I bring this up specifically is because what we find is common is people exercise this Section 55 right in situations where they're not receiving enough information, when they don't feel that they have enough communications from their corporations and they feel the need to go and get that information themselves. So if you want to avoid that process, that administrative nightmare, communication really is the best way to avoid that. Be open, be transparent, and help people feel like they're part of the community that they're invested in. And that's it for me for now, but I'm sure I'll chime in at other points.
Absolutely. I have a couple of questions, Martin and Luis. One actually came up in our Q&A, and I think it's a really great question right now, because recently we've seen a change in how communication needs to happen within condominiums. Before, it used to be you had to request, you had to approve email, electronic communication. Mail was the default, like regular mail, Canada Post. And we've seen that flip most recently, that the default is now electronic communication versus Canada Post or regular mail. And so we do have a board member asking us, does Sanderson maintain an email ID list for condo corps that the board can use and send under the board's name, not Sanderson? Luis, how do you feel about this? Because they've given permission for the condo to do so. Sharing that's kind of a bit, I mean, our policy is we aren't really sharing that, but they are a board member. And on a records requests for a list of owners, email addresses, from my understanding, are not something that need to be disclosed. So I'm looking for some feedback on this one. It's a bit sticky.
Absolutely. And it's a great question, and one that gets asked all the time? And the answer is a pretty easy one. You can't share your email addresses or owners' email addresses, generally even to board members. The reality is that board members are only directors when they're in a duly constituted board meeting, and you're only wearing that director hat for that very limited time. The rest of the time you are an owner like everybody else. And in that circumstance, you wouldn't be entitled, in case you're 100% correct, you're not entitled to other owners' emails. So owners are allowed to request a list of owners, and you're entitled to their name or the name of the unit owner. Specifically, it could be a corporate entity. You've got the address for service and the unit that they own, and that's it. And it comes down to a privacy issue, and it's something that's been ruled on a lot. Typically, and one thing that's really important to understand is that condominiums aren't really subject to PIPEDA, which is the privacy legislation, but your management is, because they are a private corporate entity. So they are the keepers of that information. And even if they have the email address for a unit owner, that shouldn't be distributed. But that's not to say that the board can't use that information. It would just be through the conduit of your management. So if you want to send something out to the owners as a board, then you can instruct management to do that. But management really shouldn't be providing you with the list of owner emails, because at the end of the day, as a regular owner, you're not entitled to it. And as a board member, it's ripe for abuse. The one thing I will touch on, I just want to confirm for you, Casey. Yes, you're correct. It has flipped in terms of the onus. If someone has provided their email address to the corporation in one way, shape, or form, then the corporation can choose to send out notices electronically, and now owners need to opt out. This is a feature of the COVID pandemic, and basically the challenges of trying to provide notices to owners that didn't really ever take the time to submit their opt-in forms, but then they weren't getting notice during the pandemic. So finally, the legislature changed and heard a lot of industry feedback. So now it's up to owners to opt out if they've provided that email address. Of course, if the condo doesn't have the email address, then they'll have to stick to the traditional brick and mortar type of mailing.
Perfect. And so Deb Somerville has said, how do we keep owners up to date? And we're going to give you some great ideas on how to do that here through the rest of the session tonight, using our condo control and through Sue's awesome notices for communicating projects, et cetera. So just hold tight and we'll be able to answer those questions for you. A couple other things that I think we should be able to answer through the Q&A as we move forward through the presentation here. I see, Luis, that you are answering one now, and hopefully you can get to a couple other ones as well. We will move through then to how do we communicate effectively. That's probably, the biggest thing. We can talk about communication, but if we're not effective in our message, or we're not clear in our message, are we really communicating? And this is where Sue's expertise definitely comes into play here. So Sue.
Well, it's funny that Luis mentioned formal and informal, and there's kind of a way to sort of mix the two. Managers can send out formal notices, all the things that have to be communicated, say for an AGM. But informally, you could do a big save the date sort of a notice. Now, I think that digital screens are your best friends. So if you're in a high rise, mid rise, or even there are townhouse solutions, that's another topic for another day. But any screen that you have that you can show a big visual gets people's attention. They don't have to point, click, tap, touch, do anything but stand in an elevator or another, well-trafficked area in your building, and they see what you need them to know. And you can make it fun, and you can make it positive, and you can make it less boring. So for instance, anything about projects, or if you want to lead them, say to condo control, you could a QR code to the formal document, but post the save the date to the AGM on the screen. And that's very simple to read and see, but it can send them on through to the more formal communications. When it comes to projects, that's one of the things that, boards get a lot done over the course of a year. Sometimes it tends to be a little quieter. People don't see all the behind the scenes. So a checklist, say, if you put that on a screen or on a poster, you can print it off. If you don't have screens, bulletin boards are still the thing in a lot of cases. But if you put the information like forward, it reminds me of a time we did a tree campaign. There was a corporation that was going to take down a whole bunch of trees. So we took the arborist report and we found out, okay, this many trees are dead, this many trees are diseased, this many trees were never indigenous to this area and shouldn't have been planted all those years ago. We let people know about the types of trees that were coming down, the new types of trees that were going to go in. And basically, by the time this was done, we did that, I think, in the spring. And by the time the buzzsaws arrived in the fall, no one was upset or freaking out. I saw a woman one time quite upset. She'd seen work being done in the garage of her property and automatically jumped to the conclusion that the building's falling down, there's something wrong. And if you consider your audience that this is probably their biggest investment they're ever going to make in their lives, anything that looks sort of scary can scare them. So it's often a good idea to say, you know what, this is what's happening, even if it's a little bit of work that, a loose stone doesn't sound like much, but to somebody walking by, what's that worker doing there? So anything that can, just get rid of the imagination station and play out the facts is usually a little bit better. So the next slide actually shows just an example of the tree campaign. So originally, this campaign, I think, was 30 pieces of content. So literally, there was a set of content that showed the percentage of trees that need to be taken down, and then showed the new trees. And this is a nice way to say, nice to meet you, Norway spruce. So coming this fall, they're going to get a replacement tree. It's not like people going, oh no, we've lost all our trees. Don't worry, there's another one coming. So it makes them feel a little bit better about that project. And anytime you show what the board's doing as a board to get work done, it creates a sense of goodwill, and a better community is going to save time and effort on the manager's side and on the board side. You'll find that you'll have shorter board meetings. The more you communicate on the front end, the less you have to deal with on the back. So the next slide, please. Thanks. So when you want to communicate effectively, usually I'll advise people to say, okay, what are your financial goals? So you want to cut costs, you want to save money, and that can be anything about, say you want to cut water usage, or you want to save on garbage. Maybe people are putting garbage into the recycling and that's costing money. Maybe people are pulling the fire bells. You got emergency vehicles showing up at all times of the day and night. That costs money. Garbage chute jams. How many times you shoot? You could probably go into your condo control and see how many times the garbage chute company was called and go, wow, we're spending a lot of money in garbage chute, calling the chute company. We could just do a series of notices that remind people not to put things down the chute. Don't jam the chute, fold your boxes, all that kind of thing. You'd be amazed at how well it works. There's not just financial goals, though. There are also social goals. So maybe you want to help people just be happier in the building. Maybe you want to have a book club, or there's a social event to have. You'd be amazed what happens, even if it's something of generating goodwill in the building. We've done notices that invite people to share a picture of their pet, say. So it was a whole focus on pets thing, and people they went crazy. They sent us all sorts of pictures. The pets, they went up on the screens in the elevator. We had one board director say, if I'd sat in the lobby and tried to introduce myself to everyone in the building, would taking me months and months. People just going in and out of the elevator and saying, hey, that's my pet. Oh, that's Duke. Hey, Duke, I know you. They're chit-chatting and having a grand old time. So creating that sense of community keeps people happy. Happy people cause less issues. That saves your corporation time and money, and your manager time and money. These are just examples of some of the campaigns you do. And again, by campaign, I mean a series of notices. There's a way to do it that you generate curiosity, interest, get their attention, and then keep that theme going so that they are aware of it. So for example, say you want to do a water savings campaign. Your financial goal could be, you know what, let's save 1,000,000 liters of water. That sounds like a lot, but we can do it. So you might have, if you're especially in a big building of 400 units or 300 units, and you're reminding people to turn off the tap while they're brushing their teeth, that's a lot of water, and you can hit 1,000,000 liters in about 3 months, like a quarter. It doesn't take as much as you think. You might augment that with posters, or maybe there's a water saving committee that says to people, hey, when they're coming in the door from work, we really want to save 1,000,000 liters of water. Can you remember to turn off the tap, take a shorter shower? There's a whole bunch of tips, not just that one. There's a whole bunch of tips that will help you reach that. The whole what's cooking on the right there, we have a campaign because noise and smells are often issues that are brought up to management, so on and so forth. So before it escalates to a situation where you might have to, call in the legal people, you can educate residents about using their hood fans and have some fun with it. Some great tasting food has some not so great smells. It's a nicer way to say, hey, you know what, maybe remember to turn on that hood fan. Don't be walking down the hallway with a gallon of perfume on. There are people who are allergic. So reminding people that, be nice to your neighbor. It's amazing how it works.
Those are all great. Those are all great, Sue. How about things when you're communicating? Do you have different strategies based on the demographic in a building, maybe? I know, for example, we have a community that's very highly student populated, right? So I think that would be a different type of notice than maybe an older demographic in a building, right? So do you help work on those strategies to help reach the target audience, I guess? So
Yes, for sure. So usually what we'll do is we'll sit down with the management and or board team and go through things like, okay, what do you know about your audience? How much can you say about them? Age, how do they perceive themselves? Are they owners versus renters? People who come from homes and are used to, living in a home, doing their garbage, folding, up their boxes, that kind of thing. They might not need those set of rules, but they might be interested in, say, a card night or something like that. New residents who are coming in, if you have a high rentership in your building, that could be that every month around the 1st, you want to run a Condo 101 series. So there is an actual, fun way of making it look like this is the role of the manager. The proper way to reach the board is a board member isn't a board member when he's in the elevator, so don't be pestering that person when they're not in that role. There's so much that you can do, and if you run that at the beginning of the month when people are coming in, even if it's about keeping your doors open or not putting weather stripping on, all that stuff, there's so much information that you can disseminate. And if you plan it properly, when there's an influx of new people with that audience, or if there's a bit of an older audience, empty nesters, so they're used to being homeowners, you can plan your communications appropriately, and that will have the most impact and positively affect your bottom line and your social bottom line.
That's awesome. No, I think those are excellent tips. And by planning and fire preventing versus firefighting in a lot of instances, which is what we have to do often as managers, and using the tools we have available like Condo Control, we could implement those and it makes everyone's life a little bit easier, and we're able to kind of set it and forget it. And Juliette, I'm going to let you talk about how that part works, if you don't mind. So.
No, thank you, Casey. So here at Condo Control, we are a property management software, and we're all about making your corporations more efficient and communication deeper within your communities. So we have many modules. However, the 4 that kind of deal most with communications are the announcements, the event calendar, service requests, and file library. And I'm going to talk about each a little bit here. So I'll start off with our announcements, which is a tool for mass communication to residents. So the way it works is announcement is created and Condo Control sends an email notification to the residents within the corporation. Now, within that email notification, residents can see the actual announcement. Plus, it provides a link for the residents to view the announcement in Condo Control itself. Also, Condo Control can give management the ability to send the announcement to the entire corporation, or maybe you just want to give it to a specific group of residents. So maybe only want to send an announcement to only the owners or the residents, or maybe even possibly just the fourth floor. Why does management use announcements? And there's three major reasons here. The first one is it increases their reach and improves communication to your residents. They use it to update and remind residents of important events and send important messages. So things like weather-related updates or budget announcements, newsletters, building operational updates, such as maybe a garage wash, or project updates, or as Luis was talking about earlier, legal updates such as PICs and ICUs. Announcements also really helps save the corporation money. So sending out emails electronically through announcements significantly reduces the time and resources required to print and deliver notices and letters door to door. And I'll tell you, once when I was managing a building, right when I started off managing condo corporations, I decided that I was going to hand deliver an AGM package to a 216 unit building. And I'm thinking to myself, because I'm kind of brand new, it's not going to take me long, man. I'm going to run right through this. It's going to take me like half an hour. Well, turns out when you're walking the building, people want to stop. They want to chit chat. You see something that's not quite right. You note it down. So that half an hour job for me that day turned into like 3 hours. So what I could have done that day is just send the AGM package, maybe not only at that time during mail, but I could have also sent it on an announcement electronically, which would have taken 5 minutes. So it really saves time. The other thing it does is it saves the corporations tons of money for printing, envelope, and the one thing that keeps going up and up, postage costs. So that can add up really, really quickly, and it generally can be a really costly line item in the corporation's budget. The other thing that management can do with announcements is it can track delivery results. So there's reports in Condo Control that could show if email notifications were delivered to a recipient. And not only that, we can see if the link within the announcement was opened and clicked on. So really important for management to be able to see that. They can also see if the email notifications bounce, so they can reach out to residents and obtain updated emailed information. Second thing I'm going to talk about here is events. So it's important to keep owners and residents informed of different events happening in the community. And you can do that by utilizing the events module. What is it? So the events module is a fully customizable calendar that allows management and residents to view and keep track of all corporation events. And you can do that either on one calendar, or maybe you want to do it on multiple calendars. You can use the events module for marking events like AGMs, town halls, maintenance activities such as HVAC inspections or window washing. You can also put social events on there like holiday parties. And within those events, you can also include details about the event that you create, like time, where it is, maybe there's going to be a dress code, anything anybody should bring. And on top of that, we also have the capabilities of sending out automatic reminders 24 hours prior to the event, really to encourage attendance. This helps management not only communicate to residents about events happening in their community, but also having all the corporation events in one place. I can tell you reduces phone calls and email inquiries to management of any events happening. So back before software was really used in with management companies, I can tell you when an AGM was coming up, as a manager, I got about 1,000 phone calls. When's the AGM? I've lost my notice. I don't know where to find this. Where do I go? What church, what church is it at? Whatever you're holding the event. Man, they can just go into Condo Control, look at the event there, all the information's there. Now you're not getting that phone call. Management's more effective. People are happier. They know where to find this information. Thirdly, I'm going to talk about is service requests. Now, this is a really important module for us It's also really important for management. So this is where residents can go and submit electronically any type of service requests for repairs, and they do that from their computer in their own home, or even using our mobile app. They can submit service requests for pretty much anything, but something maybe like a leak or a broken fan coil unit. Maybe if they've seen a common area deficiency, or they can just simply submit a question to management, something simple like, how do I obtain a new key for my front door? They can do that by service request. Management can also reply back within the module itself. It's important that residents are directed to put all of their requests through service requests. And we really encourage this because it keeps all of those requests in one place, one source of truth. As a manager, I find it was really difficult to have all of these different mediums for communication, because then you're kind of sifting through all of those mediums, trying to, get everything done on time. If we can encourage it to go through service requests, it's all in one place, and it makes management much more efficient. The other thing that Condo Control can do for service requests is that it's reportable. So management can also go in, analyze what types of service requests are they getting most frequently, and when are they getting these service requests. They can go in there, take a look at the data, and hopefully it can better prepare them for anything coming up in upcoming seasons. Now, the fourth thing I'm going to talk about, and it's really super important, is our file library. And really important because it keeps all of the corporation's documentation centralized in one location, which is accessible by residents and owners too. Within the file library, you have the ability to organize these files into file folders. Pretty simple, make it really, really organized, streamlined management. Critical documents can go into different folders. Also in these folders, you can add different permission levels for extra security. Customizable permission levels allow for a more granular control over these files, and you can set permissions on who can view them, who can edit them, which enhances the security of these files. As an example, you can give permissions for owners to be able to see a certain set of documents. Maybe that would be like approved board meeting minutes, but at the same time, you can restrict that access to tenants. And it also ensures sensitive documents are only accessible to authorized users. And this protects confidentiality and reduces the risk of unauthorized access or any type of data breaches. The system also can notify users when new documents are uploaded. And this really helps keep residents informed about new or updated documents. It also enhances communication and transparency and ensures everybody's on the same page. But the big thing for me for file library is it would significantly reduce, and I would hope eliminate, requests for records from owners. That's a big one. If you have all of your documentation that owners are entitled to on Condo Control and they can access it, they don't have to put in that request for records. They can just go in, take a look, and get it for themselves. So it's really important that these documents are uploaded and that owners have access to them. Having less requests for records is better for everybody.
Thanks,
Questions?
Sue had her hand up. I think she had something to add for us to this conversation.
I do. It's interesting this because, a lot of people won't bother to read emails, or maybe they won't go visit Condo Control Central as much as you'd like them to. So there's a few things that pop up here. You mentioned an AGM. So you can do a series of notices either on your bulletin board or preferably a digital screen. But you can say like the save the date. Why should you attend? We've done things with bubbles. One guy going, why should I go to the AGM? And the other guy goes, because we need to reach quorum. And if you have to reschedule an AGM, it's expensive. Then you'll go, what's quorum? And there's a definition of quorum. Everything else that they think of that in an AGM they might not know, you can get that stuff out onto a digital screen and work in tandem with something like Condo Control. So for example, maybe there's we've done campaigns that actually direct people. Go, you have a service request, go to Condo Control, and it's there on the screen in the elevator, so they know that that's where they're supposed to go. And there's a whole campaign. You know, you want to book an amenity, Condo Control. You want to do this, Condo Control. On the other hand, when you have files in a library, say some of those things you want people to take part in a survey or read something else, make use of a QR code on a screen. So you can create a QR code and post that code on the screen. We've helped people pass bylaws this way. We've helped people reach quorum this way, because literally you can do a countdown on a screen in the elevator. The manager goes, oh, we need 170 people to meet quorum. Okay, how many have you got? We got 160. Or we've got 10. So it's, you put a notice, we need 160 more. And then as it goes down, you let it count down, and you have the QR code that would lead to the document or to the sign up page. In some cases, it's an individual's email. So you'd have to put the document, the main document that points them back to their own email to get that link. But making use of these things in tandem helps get the message. People are standing there, they see what they need to know. And then if they have to go search for it, you give them an easy path to get there.
That's all great information. Thanks, Sue. Luis, you had something to add as well?
Just a small thing. First of all, I love everything that Sue said. I live in a condo that has digital screens, and I cannot tell you the amount of times that I've learned something that I didn't see in my email, probably because I spend all day working in my email. So I don't look at my personal email, which I should do a little bit more. But it's amazing how effective it is. Like, I'll have my headphones in and I'll look at the screen and say, hey, like, I didn't realize that was happening. I guess I need to move my car this week for the garage washing. But what I really wanted to comment on was the file library. Generally, I love my clients that have Condo Control. Part of that is because of the file library. I cannot emphasize enough how much money so many of my clients would save if they just had an accessible file library for owners to get their records. Because half of my cases at the Condominium Authority Tribunal are generally owners who are asking for records that they are absolutely entitled to, and either they didn't get a response quickly enough or they weren't satisfied. And I even had one condo where they refused to provide records, even though I suggested this idea a million times. And like 25 different owners got together and brought like the same CAT application 15 different times and tried to get the same records over and over again. So it really does make a massive difference for condos to be open and transparent, and for owners to feel that they can get access to those records without having to jump through all of the legal hoops that are there for a reason. But you can mitigate a lot of disputes if you're just a little bit more open and proactive with resources like this.
Absolutely. Absolutely, I agree. And that's why we do try to mesh both what Sue's offering and Condo Control, what Juliette has for us, because they definitely work very well hand in hand, meeting all the different needs of people that we are trying to take care of. And that leads us then to kind of where we're going in this. When communication is not effective, and what we have seen, and it's not always a communication fault, but I would say 90% of the time, issues can be solved through good communication, right? Because it's always that monster in the closet when people don't know, or when they have an idea in their head about what something is doing. Like Sue said, if they see someone moving a couple rocks, it can be a huge trigger for someone. And we don't always know what's happening outside of the condo. So the more information we can give people about the condo, the better, right? And what happens outside of that, we can't control. But we have seen it leading to a world where communication hasn't been so kind. There's very unreasonable expectations placed on the board and management, regardless of how much communication they have been given or what maybe they're allowed to give. Because there are instances, as Luis spoke to, where we're not allowed to give information out, things that do fall under privacy. And we've seen a lot of harassment. A lot of people have very short fuses these days with all of the things they're dealing with in this world that we live in. We seem to have lost a little bit of common decency and common sense and humanity. I would say from the pandemic on, like from the start of COVID on, as we've gotten back to what we deem normal. I would say we've seen a huge increase in harassment and just very bad behavior by individuals towards other individuals. And so a comment that I like to always reflect on, so whether we're posting announcements or we're on Condo Control or we're using Digi Notice or we're reaching out in an email or through a phone call, or responding to an email, that we should be responding, not reacting. Because I think we've gotten to be a very reactive type of being, right? And so if we can take the time to respond and not react, we might see a decrease in this harassment, but not everyone lives by that methodology. So we've seen a huge increase of harassment against managers and board members in the last few months, in the last year, I would say. And how do we go about handling that? I don't remember who's first on this topic because it hits all of us pretty hard. Who was our first slide on that one, my love? I think it was Sue. Pardon? Oh, sorry, but Juliette, I'm sorry, you have more slides onto Condo Control, which we'll share some graphs after, but this is what Sanderson has used through CC, how we've seen these trends, right, Juliette, and how it's helped as that piece has moved on. So do you want to talk about those first?
Yeah, so I will talk about this. So we do take statistics for our clients, and I did pull up Sanderson's, who has very good communication. So this is for their portfolio entirely, not one specific corporation, starting from January 2020 through to December of 2023. And as you can see, these are the amount of their announcements sent for their portfolio. So you can see, it's usually in the hundreds, especially sort of during peak times, which tend to be around the holidays. This is especially, I think, due to weather announcements that you guys make. So if you go to the next slide, this translates into how many email notifications are sent from these announcements. And this is a much larger number. So you can imagine, back before software, this could have potentially been notices delivered door to door, notices, remember printing out the paper ones and posting them in elevators back in the day, that type of thing. But the amount of users that we're hitting, that Sanderson is hitting specifically, is incredible. So if you look for January 2022, their announcements hit over 300, or made over 300,000 email notifications sent. So that's a really fantastic number. The other thing that Sanderson's really great at doing is uploading documents to the file library. You can go to the next slide.
It's loading.
So you will see that they are really, really good at keeping corporation files within Condo Control. That's fine. And people and your users are indeed looking at these files. So, for instance, in October of 2022, over 500 files throughout their portfolio were viewed. So, this was instead of the owner or resident calling management saying, can I have whatever file is I'm looking for? They're going into Condo Control. They're viewing these files online, makes management much more efficient, owners much more informed, everybody happy.
Excellent. And then, sorry that I jumped the gun on us and led us to harassment. But Sue, if you want to start this one off and we can talk about this. One other comment we did get was even harassment amongst board members themselves, right? I mean, you know, it's not always a group of friends sitting around the board table. So how do we address that as well? So.
Well, it's funny because we actually have a series of notices that we post sometimes that are literally aimed towards would-be board directors, for example. So it's sort of a Condo 101 again about board directors, what the role comprises of, how people should behave, how they should do things, reminders that it's not their agenda, it's teamwork to take the building where it needs to go. And it's funny because if you do have a digital display somewhere in the building, elevators preferably, but if you have that sort of running, the screens sort of take on a different role than, say, a manager telling a would-be board member how to behave or a current board member how to behave. It's sort of like the screens telling the rules. It's a separate entity, and there's a psychological effect that goes on there. So while board members are living in the building and going about their business, they're learning how they should look at their responsibility. Policy reminders to say that the building doesn't tolerate harassment of any kind. We actually did a series that was very good that had 3 separate, very creative notices reminding people that, you know, your point gets lost when you yell, and it had the word point. We had a copy of it somewhere. I don't see it here, but reminds people in a very creative way, something that they wouldn't normally see in a building. It doesn't look like a letter. It's not got a bunch of type on it. It's a visual graphic. It almost looks like a magazine ad. And this is the sort of way you can get resident attention by looking at that thing. One thing I like a lot about Condo Control is there's no interruption. If people work with Condo Control and Digi Notice together, there's no workflow interruption. A manager literally just fires out notices like they normally would, add Digi Notice to their Condo Control email blast list. We get whatever that notice is, and we translate that into a digital format. So make it look good, make it look, and if we see something going by like, oh, people are really jamming the chute, take away that reactive condo trap of people going, oh, every time there's a chute jam, we're doing this, and go, you know what? You've got an issue. Condo Control shows so many calls to the chute company. Let's do a campaign that reminds people in a nice, funny way how to really not have that issue anymore. So you're being proactive, planning this out throughout the course of the year, and that helps a lot. And harassment is certainly one of the ones that I ran a poll on LinkedIn a while back, and not one person said, oh, wait, we haven't been harassed. In fact, I think it was 90% of them had been harassed more than once. So it's really important to get those policies out and let people know that that's not an acceptable way to behave in the building.
Absolutely. And Luis, there was a question that came up, and I think it's a good one. Like, how do you deal with harassment on social media sites, such as Facebook? Sorry,
I love, no, that's okay. I love this question, and it's one that I've had a lot of conversations about. Handling social media harassment is something that is extremely difficult, and it's pervasive throughout society at this point. You're dealing with kids in middle school and high school, dealing with it all the way up to grown adults and senior citizens who are living in condos, and it's happening everywhere. And my general preference is, if you can avoid that social media interaction to begin with, from a corporate perspective, it's probably best. If the harassment becomes to a degree that's overly serious, then that's something that needs to be escalated. So if it's a board member that's being harassed by an owner or manager or if it's a board member that's being harassed by an owner, then needs to be dealt with by the rest of the board and likely ends up on my desk. If it's a manager that's being harassed by owners or residents, then that needs to go to the board. And worst case scenario, it ends up on my desk. And if and this is my least favorite of all of them, or the worst. None of them are favorites. If it's a board member harassing management, that is an extremely difficult situation, and management needs to deal with the board members that are not participating in that harassment, and then it probably ends up on my desk. But the reality is I cannot agree more with everything that's already been said, especially when it comes to policies. Those policies are unbelievably important. They're not recognized by the Condo Act specifically, but harassment policies are recognized by other statutes, and they are very important to remind people. First of all, that harassment exists. I think people who aren't subjected to it generally can't imagine other people behaving that way, but it does happen. People need to be aware of it, and they need to know what they can do and who to report it to in a particular situation. So generally, it's an escalation to the right authority figure, and in the worst of worst case scenarios, it ends up with a lawyer who will have to get involved and unfortunately make threats of legal action to try and get that harassment to stop. And sometimes even that's not enough, and you actually have to follow through with the threat of legal action. And it is an unfortunate situation. I think, Casey, you said it best when it seems that it's just a way of being now, and it's much harder. But communication and building those connections, it's really, you want to try and mitigate it and prevent it before it even gets to a point where people are frustrated and angry and will harass you to begin with. But it's unavoidable sometimes.
I think that's an excellent point, because I think as we have moved into more of a digital type of communication as well, we've lost a little bit of that personal connection. I mean, how many times do we talk about the person, we're responding via email, and our natural instinct is to infer tone or think it was written in a way that you can't take black and white words and decide how you want them to sound, right? And oftentimes I say to the team, just pick up the phone, just pick up the phone. And when you talk to that person on the phone, it's completely different than what was in front of you, because you can be very brave behind a keyboard, right? We all can, in that invisible type of setting, or we can make it to be something that maybe it wasn't. So I think it's really important just to continue to make connection. And as I said, to respond and not react. Juliette, I'm going to look for your input on this one here. You have your hand up, and then Sue, you want to step into, and we can keep this discussion going.
So I'm going to put on my property manager hat for a minute. So I actually have personal experience with a social media group and owners on a social media group saying some not nice things necessarily about management and the board. And in this case, the board was right in the thick of things, trying to answer and answer all the questions from these residents, defending themselves quite often. And it was harassment. It got absolutely out of control. So eventually they had condo control, luckily. And Condo Control also has a discussion forum. What happened here was the board finally put their foot down, kind of made like a last post and said, look, we're going to open up this Condo Control discussion forum. If you have questions, please put it there. Otherwise, we're leaving this Facebook group. All official answers will go through that. What made this better for them is that they could then moderate this discussion forum and control the narrative a little bit better. It made it a lot easier for them, and it ended up working out. And eventually, the owners that really wanted solid answers and were serious about their questions asked them on the discussion forum in Condo Control. And there was a few angry individuals that were left in the Facebook group, but everyone kind of moved over, and it got a lot easier for them. But they disconnected themselves, only answered when they wanted to, or answered through management through the discussion forum on Condo Control. Things calmed down. I think you're muted.
Sorry, I was. Yeah. Sue, if you want to go next, and then Luis, you can answer that question we had in the chat live right after that.
Perfect.
Yeah, I think it's important to let people know that the proper channel of information should come from the management office, the board via the manager to the resident. People getting onto, Facebook and all other sorts of social media. Usually I just recommend just disengage from that. You can look at it, read it, see what the hot topics are, and then take those hot topics and address them on the digital display. So you find out people are upset about this, that, or the other thing, answer those questions just as if it was a notice appearing in the elevator. And that way you didn't engage with, some nastiness that could go on, but you did address the issue, the topic, and you answered anybody's questions. Put that on a screen. So again, it's paying attention to your audience, but not engaging with nasty things. And it's really hard to do that. You look at celebrities and the ones who seem the best off are the ones who ignore their own press. Just carry on going about your business and running the corporation, and set a corporate culture of niceness. That goes right from the start. As soon as people move in, you've got nice things showing on the screen, welcome messages. You're letting them know there's events, there's even social things. Let your social committee say some things on the screens as well. Let them have a part of it, so that it's the people part, not just the corporate part.
Absolutely, an excellent point, Sue. We do through Condo Control. That's how we dealt with one of our Facebook groups as well, is that we opened up the forum, and that's how they use and moderate, as Juliette explained. Luis, you want to take the question from Q&A?
I do. I just also, since it's a pattern, I'm just going to agree with Sue again, though. I really love the term disengagement. I think in social media, nastiness, I think sometimes that is the best answer, just disengage. But anyways, there's a question in the Q&A and I inadvertently clicked the wrong button, so I'm just going to answer it live. The question was, we've been told that over the years that policies are not a good thing, to just have rules that are easier to change. I believe in the importance of policy. Should policies be created by owners and then voted on by all, or should we use a CAO policy and ask owners to approve? And the answer is neither. Policies are not really a legally recognized governing document under the Condominium Act. So under condos, you've got your declaration, which is like your supreme document, your bylaws, which deal with the operations, and your rules. And they're all made and amended and repealed in different ways. The declaration has to be consent by 80% of the owners or more. Bylaws are 50% of owners or more vote in favor of it. And your rules are made effectively, I want to say decree, but the boards decide when they make or repeal or change rules. And then they have to provide a formal notice. We were talking about that earlier today. They need to provide a formal notice under Section 58. And if no one objects to it, there's no requisition meeting in 30 days, then they become effective. However, policies are what we would consider to be the lowest level of governance, and they don't hold any legal weight, except for the fact that they describe what processes or procedures are going to be taken by the corporation in certain instances. So there is a school of thought that policies aren't really that valuable because there's nothing that legally governs them. I am of the view that policies are valuable, and I believe in their importance as well, because at the very least, they communicate and advise of expectations that owners and residents can have in the face of certain circumstances. So the only policies that are really required are workplace harassment policies, and that's required by the Employment Act. So that's one of those things where that is there and put in place to protect people who work at the corporations. But, we often advocate for policies that deal with harassment above and beyond workplace, harassment between residents and harassment with directors. Those are things that are not covered under workplace harassment policies, but ought to be covered by harassment policies in general. And the beautiful thing about policies is they're also easy to communicate. They're easy to put in the files, to send out, to put in the digital notice boards, and to say, these are the policies that we have, and this is what we will do in these situations. So people are aware. Sue, I think you had your hand up.
Yeah. You know, I was just thinking, I just thought of something else when you were talking about the harassment. Another thing to think of that might help is, especially since we mentioned that it seems to be post-pandemic, all these unhappy yelling people. There's a lot of loneliness out there, like was mentioned. You know, people are not as happy as they were before, and keeping that in mind and building that into your communication strategy can help as well. Maybe you're posting notices about mental health help locations where people can go to get help if they need it. Some of this is mental health driven, I think. And so anything that you can do to help people be less lonely and a little more happy and a little less stressed out. You know, prices are going up all around, even if it's tips on, you know, dinner for one, so you're not ordering in all the time. There's so much that you can do communication wise to be proactive and really make a condo corporation a great home.
All excellent points. We did ask for questions ahead of time, and I think we've answered some of them, and just going through them quickly here. So how do you deal with the board that spreads lies and misinformation on Facebook? We've talked about that. We've kind of said to disengage, and I think that's the best. And the frequency and type of communication over a large capital project, I think that's a combination of both Digi Notice and Condo Control, how we talked about, and you know, updates every couple weeks versus every month. I think it depends on the project and the community, but all information is good information, right? The more we can provide, the updates we can provide, that's always good. Strategies for communicating with other board members when there are disagreements. I think that's a great question, actually, and something we sort of touched on, but I don't know that, I think we could give that a little bit more of a deep dive. Well, what do you do when, I mean, again, you're not all friends sitting around the board table necessarily. You all are there with a purpose to direct the condominium corporation and take care of your responsibilities. And so what are some strategies when there's some disagreements amongst the table? Who would like to go first on that one? Martin, you want to take that one? We haven't heard from you in a bit.
Sure. So because I can speak both as a board member and as a condo manager. And also I guess I just look back at my experience in banking because I was in a client-facing role. And when you're dealing with someone who is angry or someone who disagrees with you, you listen first. And you avoid escalating and you avoid responding very quickly with an emotional response, and just listen to what the person has to say. At a board meeting, if we disagree on something, then sometimes we need to bring in experts because we're all guessing at what the answers might be, but none of us really know. And as a board member, we do need to rely on the advice of experts to help guide us, whether that be a contractor or an engineer or a lawyer, just to help us through and to manage that. But to me, it's really just all about de-escalating and listening intently to what the other person is really trying to say.
Excellent points. I agree. I think it's all about listening and again, responding, not reacting. And that's on all parties, right? We need to make sure. Sometimes I find, yeah, if we're disagreeing on something, it's good to allow everyone a chance to have their opportunity to speak, maybe writing down the pros and cons and making sure that the table feels open, that everyone is comfortable enough to speak. Because sometimes we have those people who don't say anything. So it's important that we give every member an opportunity to have their say, and there's no wrong answer around that table. So anybody else have any insight on that one? Any tips or tricks to add? Luis?
Yeah, I can step in here. I deal with a lot of boards that at times may disagree amongst themselves. And, you know, one thing that I've seen that is very helpful is to try to get everyone to take a step back and look at everything from a more objective perspective in terms of how they're going to make a decision. So if you've got somewhat of a deadlock, people are you know, digging into their positions, then sometimes what you want to do is you want to take a step back and try and find some way to create an objective system to arrive at a decision that everyone says, okay, it was a democratic choice, and it wasn't just a majority rule. Everyone raises their hands, but there's a little bit more of a process, and everyone agrees to that process regardless of what the outcome is. So one thing that we've done is if you've had multiple things to consider, but you need to pick one. So for example, you've got contractors and there are differing opinions, you can create like a reverse voting system. So you rank them, and then you rank the votes. Like your number one gets 3 points, your number two gets 2 points, and your number one gets 1 point. And then you get everyone to do a blind ballot, and then whoever gets the most points, because you'll get different permutations, that's the decision that's made. So there's no hard feelings. You've eliminated emotion out of it as best you can. And as long as everyone buys into that decision-making process, it's okay. But really, if you can try and be a little bit more objective, recognizing that some people just aren't going to move in their positions, it may ease the tensions. It's not, people are going to still leave unhappy, but at least everyone will know that it was fair.
Excellent, excellent points. Another question that we did get was, how do you convince residents to take property management issues directly to the PM without having to ask a board member first? And we find this a lot in communities where the board has been very hands-on for quite a while, or have been self-managed maybe prior to coming to property management. So some suggestions on having that happen. Martin, you want to take this one?
And a lot of the corporations I deal with publish newsletters, and they make that a kind of a standing part of the newsletter. If you have any questions or concerns, please direct them all to our property manager, and here's Martin Venema's contact information. Also, we posted announcements on condo control, just as a reminders to owners and to residents to send all their questions, their service requests directly to the property manager, and really just communicating that in as many ways as we can, as often as we can. Also, what we ask board members to do, if an owner comes to you, redirect them and to directly to their property manager to respond.
All good thoughts. Sue, you want to go ahead?
I'm muted there. I just wanted to know if I could share my screen. I have a notice that anybody could use if they wanted it, that actually
Absolutely.
addresses that in a fun way.
You got it. I think you
Let me
should
just
just
see
share
if I
now.
can.
Yeah.
Yeah, hold on one sec. So that's something that you can put on a screen, or it can be printed off. We changed the shape to be portrait, or it can be printed off as an 8.5 by 11. But that's something that is visually fun to look at, but it gets the rule across. And if you're posting this as part of your communication, strategy various times throughout the year, especially if it's, say, high turnover building, you do it when you think people are moving in. You set the tone right off the bat from the minute that they enter the door to live there. And it's nice. It's not, finger wagging, and it's not boring.
No, it's great. Thank you. Awesome. Luis, do you have
If anybody wants that, they're free to clip it, or I can email people.
We will send it out in the notes as well, so that people are free to use it.
Oh, great.
Okay, Luis?
So I had two things. I think the first one is try to centralize where communications are coming from. Oftentimes that means that a board will create a board specific email address, and it may still be one that's monitored by management, but it's called like the board at ICE condos. That's the first one that came to mind. But that really allows for everyone to know this is the one communication path that it goes to, whether it's really the board or management. But I think the more important piece, and Martin touched on it, is it comes down to the board members too. It's very easy when you're a board member and you're approached by someone to want to answer and to provide help and feedback as best you can. But I think it's really up to the board members to sort of draw that line and say, right now I'm an owner and a resident, I'm not on the board. Please direct your concern to management. because you start creating those precedents, right? The first time it seems like a meaningless interaction. 6 months down the road, they're knocking on your door at 11 o'clock at night because, you know, I'm buddies with the board president and I can ask. So I think it really is also just creating those boundaries. And that really is up to the directors to try and do that nicely and politely, I think is the best way.
Absolutely.
But yes, the boundaries are important.
They definitely are. We had a couple questions left, but we're getting to the end of the session. So I don't like to keep people over. I do like to be very punctual. I want to thank everyone for attending. I hope that everyone did get some valuable tips and tricks and information on how we can all be better communicators moving forward. And our next session will be on handling emergencies. And that session, because I always get the date wrong, will be May 1st. So everyone can look forward to that. And it will be handling emergencies, which I think is always an important thing as we see the spring coming along. We will have, thanks to Sue, some handouts for everyone following this, which we will send out with the questions and all the information, because there is a lot of information to be retained here. We do have a couple more questions in here that I haven't answered yet, but we will be sure to get those answered as well. I do really want to thank all of our presenters. You guys are amazing at what you do. Your information was invaluable, and I really appreciate you taking the time again to share it. And the last thing is I'm going to let you know who had what Super Bowl snack. So the maker of the football-shaped Rice Krispie treat would have been Sue. And I know that we talked about doing, you know, a Super Bowl food crawl, but we all live too far apart. So unfortunately won't be able to make that happen, but that sounds delicious. Luis is the mini mac sliders, and Juliette is all things potato. And Martin is the classic chicken wing. So thank you again, everyone. I hope that your team wins this weekend. If you're cheering or if you're just there for the halftime show like me, enjoy that as well. And thank you again, everyone. And we look forward to seeing you at our session in May. Take care, everyone. Have a lovely day.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me,
Thank you.
Casey.
Bye.
Thanks, guys. Take care.
Bye.
Bye. Go Team Taylor.
That's right.
See you guys.
Bye.
Bye.